Okay, hi guys. This is part 2 of our elections and voting behavior lecture. So this won't be quite as long as the other one, but there are a few key slides that I need to go over, and this will be helpful if this is review for you or if you missed a few days in class or that sort of thing. So we left off talking about the importance of voting and different terms that you need to know in regards to voting. So legitimacy of the election itself, and then political efficacy, so the belief that your participation matters. So you're going to have high political efficacy if you believe that's true. With voter fraud or anything like that, it tends to go down. And then again, the civic duty, so the belief that, having a democracy is important, so therefore we should participate in that and vote for our elected officials and vote for any legislation that comes our way. Okay, so let's look at registering to vote itself. So in 1888, West Virginia had 159,000 votes, but only 147 eligible voters. So they thought, maybe we should do something to prevent voter fraud. We had a discussion, a debate in class in which you guys looked at voter ID laws, and there's definitely positives and negatives to that, and I hope that you guys were able to kind of see both sides a little bit more clearly after that discussion took place. So most states have voter registration laws in place, and in Idaho it's one of those that's really conservative and liberal as well, or conservative and relaxed as well, I guess I should say. And so in Idaho, you guys know that you are required to show your voter ID, but if you don't have it with you, you can sign a waiver that you are stating that you swear you are who you say you are. And so they do check the signatures on that and everything as well to make sure that it actually is you. And if your signature doesn't match, then your vote is thrown out. And this can actually kind of be a problem because people's signatures tend to change over time. And so it can be kind of an issue. So states did adopt voter registration to prevent fraud from happening. North Dakota is the only state that doesn't have a registration. So I guess they just don't care. Maybe there's not enough people there that they don't care. But all other states do have voter registration. And then they have a variety of different voter ID laws in place as well. Something called the Motor Voter Act of 1993 is a policy that was put in place to try and expand voter registration, since it can be kind of a tedious process. So they thought, hey, let's make it easier on people. And so when you go and get your driver's license, you can also register to vote. And so that's why I tell all of you guys that when you turn 18, you have to get a new license anyhow in Idaho. So you might as well register to vote. Now sometimes the DMV workers can get a little cranky with you and say you can't do it here, you need to do it somewhere else. But if you have the paper with you, then they will either take it themselves or they can direct you to where you need to drop it off as well. But it's all done at the DMV. You can also send it to the Secretary of State in Idaho. We do not allow people to register to vote online yet. That's something that some states are moving towards. And right now in Idaho, that's not a policy. Okay, so why would you vote? What makes you more likely to vote than someone else? So these are all the factors that the AP College Board have agreed upon and political scientists agree upon as far as factors that increase the likelihood of voting. So what age are you? What age are the people that vote the most? Well, we will see that usually the older you are, the more likely you are to vote. So why would that be? Well, older people don't work, so they have time to do it. The lowest group, or the age group that votes the least, are going to be those 18 to 29-year-olds. So oftentimes those individuals think, it doesn't matter to me, I'm not interested in politics, I'm in college, I'm busy, maybe starting up a new family, and so it doesn't seem as important to vote at that age. It does change as you get older, and all of a sudden life changes and you have different experiences. But we do see the largest growing, the largest block of voters are going to be those 65 plus. And then 18 to 29-year-olds don't usually come out to vote. Another indicator is education. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to vote. Marriage, if you are married, you're more likely to vote. White people vote more than others. Females tend to vote more than others. Union members, government workers as well. This northerner out there, I feel like that's a little outdated now. We used to be able to determine a lot of things based on region. If you were a northerner or a southerner, and I feel that things have changed quite a bit, so that's probably not a key point that I would argue if you were given a free response question and asked to identify and explain factors that increase the likelihood of voting. I would probably leave that one out. But union members, you can imagine, they have something at stake. They want the support of the government for their unions to protect them. Government workers oftentimes have a job at stake too, so they're more likely to vote, and they are just invested in government a little bit more as well. So this group of people here, you can see then all of these factors just increase that likelihood that you will see that demographic of people at the ballot box. So here's a sample question. Which of these would be most likely to vote? A middle-aged professor at a private university. B, a young southerner without a high school diploma. C, a northerner with a high school diploma who is a union member. D, a 63-year-old government worker with a doctorate. Or E, a well-educated senior citizen who used to work for a big corporation. So I'll give you a minute to think about the answer. Okay, the correct answer is D. So that 63-year-old, that gives you the age, government worker, that's another indicator with a doctorate. So all of those things are stronger than the other options given. So the correct answer there is D. Here, let's look at a few more terms before we tackle the Electoral College. The mandate theory of elections. So this is an interesting idea. When you are a candidate and you win an election, oftentimes the candidate then thinks that he or she has a mandate of the people, and therefore he or she can carry out the policies that they promoted in the general election. For example, when Obama won in 2008, he talked about dealing with healthcare, and so it wasn't called the Affordable Care Act when he was campaigning, but everyone knew that he wanted to do something with healthcare. And he won both the popular vote and the Electoral College. So he felt that he had a mandate of the people. The people wanted him to do this, and therefore he felt justified in creating the Affordable Care Act and presenting that to Congress. It's more difficult when you are a candidate like George W. Bush in 2000 or Donald Trump today, because both of those individuals lost the popular vote and won the Electoral College. So certainly they're president. But do they really have widespread support? Do they really have a mandate of the people? Can they really justify carrying out their policies? And there can be an argument for that either way. Policy voting, then, is the idea that the electoral choices that you have are based on voters' policy preferences and where the candidates stand on policy issues. And this is really important for a lot of Republican candidates in regards to abortion and the Supreme Court. And so if you are a Republican candidate, but you lean more towards the right to choose in regards to abortion, odds are you are not going to get the vote of many, many other staunch Republicans because of that policy itself. Democrats seem to not have quite that stronghold on some policy things, but certainly there is a non-tolerance in the Democrat Party if you are a Democrat candidate and say you are pro-life. There's a resistance to vote for that person. So a lot of people tend to be policy voters now, and they don't necessarily care about the characteristics of the candidates, who they are as people, but if they will vote for them depending upon how they feel about certain policies. Retrospective voting is the idea that you need to be held accountable to your constituents. And so if you said you were going to do something and you didn't do it, retrospective voting could come into place where you could lose your seat all of a sudden, or maybe maybe Donald Trump will lose a second term if the desired results that he pledged he was going to be able to uphold and be successful with in his campaign don't take place in the next 4 years. Some of those voters may be retrospective and say, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. We're not going to vote for you again. Maybe in the primary, maybe we'll choose a different Republican. I'm not saying that would happen by any means, but I'm just using that as an example of oftentimes you can look at a senator or a representative, governor, president, and say, what have you done for me? Have you really done what you said you were going to do? Okay, so this lecture is turning out to be longer than I thought. I apologize. I will briefly touch on the basics of the Electoral College for your own background knowledge, but we will be discussing it in more detail in class. So you all are familiar now with the idea that we do not popularly elect our president. We vote for electors. And this is because the Founding Fathers felt that the average person really couldn't be trusted, is what it comes down to, and that the average person could be easily swayed by demigods, and therefore they shouldn't be given that power. So it was the state legislatures that chose the electors, and the electors then would go and choose the presidents. So really it was going to be the elites that were determining who the president is. In most all states, except for a couple, it's a winner-take-all system. And so that means that you just have to win by one, and you win all the electoral votes. So it can be a really, really close race. And this is part of the reason why you can win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College, because you just have to win by one person. So when we say that every vote matters, it does matter. It can be the difference between one candidate or the other getting all of those Electoral College votes. So Nebraska and Maine do things a little bit different in that they allow some electors to go to their districts, and then they have an overall electoral vote. So each district then gets to determine who they're going to vote for. So you could have a state then that gives some electoral votes to Hillary, for example, and some that give some electoral votes to Donald Trump. So the state itself can be split in those two systems, which is an interesting option and something that you could write to your state legislators about in changing how Idaho determines how their electors are divvied up. But this winner-take-all system really gives a lot of emphasis to those larger states and those battleground states. However, as we will see in class, it really is a lot of the low population states that have a lot of power because there are less people per elector in those states. Because remember, the formula for determining how many electors you have is the two senators plus your number of representatives. So if you're a low population state like Montana, even though you have only a few people that live there, you still get 2 senators, and that's counted into your electoral college. So even though Montana only gets 3 electors, there still are less people determining who those electors are than, say, in California, where you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people per elector, if that makes sense. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that even though in November we say, oh, this is the winner, technically we don't know who the winner is until January. And so the electors meet in December. The votes are then recounted in Congress and D.C., and the vice president is the one that then reports out those votes in January. So technically we don't know until January who the president is. But because of technology and because most states have binding policies with the electors that they do have to vote for the person that the popular vote determined they vote for, these don't really change. And again, as a review, if no candidate gets the 270 votes to win, then it goes into the House of Representatives for the president. Each state gets 1 vote. And then the Senate determines who the vice president is. So technically you could have a Republican or Democrat president and have the person they were running against as the vice president if they wanted to do that, which is kind of interesting. So this was kind of part 2 of that lecture on chapter 10. And again, we'll be talking about the Electoral College a lot more in class. Thanks for listening.